The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stood silent for the first time in 10,000 years, not the silence of peace, but the silence of victory. High Arbiter Thesson of the Vaughn rose from his ancient seat, his scaled body catching the light of a dozen suns that shone through the crystal dome above. His four eyes swept across the assembled representatives of the 12 elder species, and something like satisfaction moved across his reptilian face. "It is done," he announced, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. "Earth has gone silent. The human thread is ended." Applause rippled through the hall, not loud, not joyful, but relieved, the kind of applause that comes after a long illness, finally passes, after a dangerous animal is finally put down. The representatives of species that had ruled this galaxy for millions of years allowed themselves a moment of collective exhale. Counselor Varric of the Athani sat in the back rows where the younger species were placed. His people had only joined the council 100 years ago. Just before the humans arrived, he was small compared to the elder species, his blue-gray skin and large dark eyes marking him as prey in a room full of predators. He did not applaud, he watched. He remembered the humans too. Centuries ago, when humanity first reached beyond their small yellow sun, the galaxy had welcomed them. Varric had been young then, barely old enough to serve as a junior diplomatic aide. He remembered the excitement in the halls, the curiosity about this new species that had pulled themselves up from nothing. They were clever, the early report said, creative. They laughed easily and cried openly and felt everything with an intensity that older species had long forgotten. The council had been pleased. A new species meant new ideas, new art, new perspectives, and more importantly, new resources, new labor, new soldiers for the wars that occasionally flared at the galaxy's edges. But then came the requirements. Varric remembered the human ambassador's face when High Arbiter Theon presented the terms of council membership. All species underwent the process. Theon had explained it was for their own good. The genetic modifications would remove humanity's more dangerous tendencies, their aggression, their tribalism, their stubborn individualism. The population controls would ensure they never grew too numerous, and of course they would surrender their military capabilities to council oversight. In return, they would receive the protection and guidance of species far older and wiser than themselves. The human ambassador had listened carefully. She had asked questions, she had taken notes, and then she had said a single word that echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. No. Not we'll consider it, not let us discuss this with our government, just no. Simple and final and absolutely certain. High Arbiter Theon had not understood. In 10,000 years of council rule, no species had ever refused. Some had negotiated, some had delayed, but all had eventually submitted. It was simply how things were done. The alternative was too terrible to consider. You do not understand, Fane had said, his voice patient in the way of someone explaining to a child. This is not a request. This is the price of joining galactic civilization. All species pay it. All species benefit. The human ambassador had smiled. It was not a happy smile. With respect, High Arbiter, we understand perfectly. You're asking us to cut out the parts of ourselves that make us human. You're asking us to become something else, something safer, something easier to control, and we won't do it. Then you "We'll die," Theon had replied. "Not a threat, just a fact. The way one might tell someone that stepping off a cliff would result in a fall. Maybe the ambassador had agreed, but we'll die as ourselves." The negotiations had continued for decades. The council offered incentives, technology, trade agreements, protection from the galaxies dangers. The humans thanked them for each offer and refused each one. They were polite, they were reasonable, they simply would not bend, and so the council had decided that if humanity would not change, humanity would end. The blockade began 50 years ago. Varric remembered the day the order was given. He had risen in the ranks by then, a senior counselor with access to the inner chambers. He had watched as Thesson signed the decree that would seal Earth off from the rest of the galaxy. No ships in, no ships out, no trade, no communication, no help. They will submit within a decade. Then had predicted, when they are hungry enough, when they are desperate enough, they will beg us to take them, and we will on our terms, as we always have. But a decade passed, and Earth did not submit. 2 decades. 3. The human ships that tried to break the blockade were destroyed. The human colonies on other worlds were given a choice: accept council authority or share Earth's fate. Some surrendered. Most chose to share the fate of their home world. Those colonies went silent. 2. One by one, Varric had watched the reports come in. He had seen the satellite images of Earth cities going dark as power grids failed. He had read the intercepted transmissions that grew fewer each year, then stopped entirely. He had studied the biological data that showed population collapse, resource depletion, the slow death of a world that had been cut off from everything it needed to survive. He had said nothing. What was there to say? He was one voice among thousands, a member of a young species with no power and no influence. The elder species had made their decision. Humanity would serve as an example to any other species that might think of refusing council authority. And now, 15 years after the last transmission from Earth, Fane stood before the council and declared victory. Let the record show. The High Arbiter continued that the human experiment has ended. A species that refused to evolve, that clung to their primitive nature, has paid the natural price. This is not cruelty. This is simply the way of the universe. Those who cannot adapt do not survive. More applause this time. Louder, more confident. The representatives congratulated each other on their wisdom, their patience, their firm but fair handling of the human problem. Varric felt sick. His communication device vibrated against his wrist. He glanced down, expecting a routine message, perhaps a reminder about tomorrow's trade negotiations. Instead, he saw a priority marker he had never seen before, a marker that indicated a transmission from a source that no longer existed. Earth, his heart's his species had too began to beat faster. He opened the message with trembling fingers. The text was short, just 3 lines. Priority transmission received from Sol System Origin, Earth. Unified Government, Content Video. Message 47 minutes. Earth was not silent. Earth had sent a message. After 15 years of nothing, Earth had spoken. Varric looked up at the celebrating council, at the accepting congratulations from the other elder species representatives at the hall full of people who believed they had won. He thought about what he should do. Protocol demanded that he report this Immediately to his superiors, who would report it to their superiors, who would eventually bring it to the attention in whatever way made them look best, but protocol also demanded that priority transmissions be shared with the full council without delay. And Varric had spent 100 years following protocol, watching as it was used to delay and distort and bury anything that threatened the comfortable order of things. He stood up, High Arbiter, he called out, his voice thin against the noise of celebration. No one heard him. He tried again, louder this time, High Arbiter Theon. The room began to quiet. Heads turned toward the back rows, toward the small blue-gray alien who had dared to interrupt the victory celebration. Thessen's for eyes focused on him with the patient annoyance of a god looking down at an insect. Counselor Varric the said, you have something to add. A message, High Arbiter. Varric held up his communication device. Priority transmission from Earth. The silence that followed was different from the silence of victory. This was the silence of confusion, of uncertainty, of something that did not fit the story everyone had agreed to tell. That's impossible, someone said. Earth has been silent for 15 years. The message arrived 3 minutes ago. Varric replied, I have not viewed it, but the origin codes are verified. It comes from the soul system from Earth. Thessen's eyes narrowed. A trick, a delayed transmission programmed before their final collapse. Ghost speaking from beyond death. Perhaps Varric agreed, but protocol requires that priority transmissions be shared with the full council. Whatever this message contains, it is not mine alone to decide what it means. For a long moment Pheasant stared at him. Varric felt the weight of 10,000 years of authority pressing down on him, demanding that he sit down, shut up, let the elder species handle matters beyond his understanding. But he had spent his centuries watching and saying nothing. He was tired of silence. Play it, Theon finally said. Let us hear what the dead have to say. Varric connected his device to the chamber's display systems. The great crystal dome above them darkened, and in its place a projection appeared. A simple room, bare walls, a single chair, and in that chair sat a human. She was old, her hair was gray, her face lined with years of exhaustion and pain. But her eyes were clear and her voice, when she spoke, was steady. My name is Ellen Vasquez, she said. I am the director of the United Earth Government. This message is addressed to the Galactic Council, to every species that participated in the projection of Allen. A Vasquez hung in the air above the council chamber, frozen for a moment as the old woman gathered her thoughts. Every representative, from the mightiest elder species to the smallest junior member, sat motionless in their seats. Even the who had ruled this council for 3 centuries found himself leaning forward. I want to begin, Vasquez continued, by telling you our story, not the story you have told yourselves, but the truth of what happened. You deserve to know what you have done, and you need to understand it if you are to have any hope of surviving what comes next. She folded her hands in her lap. Her voice remained calm, almost conversational, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the death of billions. 200 years ago we reached the stars. We were so excited. All our lives we had looked up at the night sky and wondered if we were alone. When we discovered we were not, when we made first contact with your ships, we wept with joy. Finally, we thought we would join a greater community. Finally, we would have Friends among the stars, she paused. We were naive. The council welcomed us with open arms and closed fists. You offered us membership, but the price was our humanity. You wanted us to cut away everything that made us who we are, our passion, our stubbornness, our refusal to accept things simply because we are told to accept them. You called these things flaws. We called them gifts. In the council chamber, some representatives shifted uncomfortably. Others remained still, their faces hard, then watched with narrowed eyes, waiting for the point. We said no. Vasquez continued. We tried to explain that we could be good partners, good friends, good allies without becoming something other than ourselves. We offered compromises. We suggested alternatives. We asked only to be allowed to exist as we were in peace with the galaxy. You refused, and so began the blockade. Projection flickered and new images appeared behind Vasquez. Satellite photos of Earth. The first images showed blue oceans and green continents, cities glittering with light. Then the images began to change. Year by year the lights went out, the green faded to brown. The cities grew dark. 50 years. Vasquez said softly, 50 years you held us in a cage, no medicine from outside our world, no food when our crops failed, no help when the plagues came, when the earthquake struck, when our infrastructure collapsed under the weight of isolation. More images, mass graves stretching to the horizon, children with hollow eyes and swollen bellies, old people lying in rows, waiting to die because there was nothing else to wait for. 17 billion people lived on Earth when the blockade began. Would you like to know how many survived? She waited as if expecting an answer that would never come. 2 billion. We lost 15 billion people, not to war, not to some natural disaster, to you, to your patience, to your certainty that if you simply waited long enough, we would break. Counselor Varick felt tears running down his face. He had known the numbers. Of course, everyone knew the numbers, but hearing them spoken by a human, seeing the images of what those numbers meant was different from reading a report in the comfortable safety of a council office. I want to tell you about some of them, Vasquez said. Not all of them. That would take longer than the universe has left, but a few. There was a girl named Maria. She was 7 years old when the blockade began. She never knew a sky without your patrol ships. She never tasted fruit that hadn't been grown in a survival bunker. She died at 12 from a disease that could have been cured with a simple injection. An injection we could not get because you would not let us. There was a man named Chen. He was a doctor. When the medicine ran out, he kept working. He saved thousands of lives with nothing but his hands and his knowledge and his refusal to give up. He worked until his heart gave out. He was 43. There was an old woman named Grandmother Akinquo. When the food ran low, she volunteered for the end-of-life program. She said the children needed her rations more than she needed another few months. She was not alone. Millions of our elderly made the same choice. They died so the young could live. Vasquez's voice never wavered. She recited these horrors as simple facts, without drama, without accusation, and somehow that made it worse. Anger could be dismissed, pain could be ignored, but this quiet recitation of truth was impossible to push away. You expected us to surrender, she continued. You expected that Eventually, the suffering would become degraded and we would come crawling to you, begging to accept your terms. You expected us to choose survival over identity. She smiled again, that same gentle, sad smile from before. You did not understand us at all. We did not spend 50 years dying. We spent 50 years deciding. Every person who survived the blockade made a choice. They could have surrendered at any point. Any individual could have signaled your ships, offered to accept modification, traded their humanity for food and medicine. Some did. We do not blame them, but most did not. They chose to remain human. They chose to suffer and to die and to watch their loved ones die rather than become something else. And in that choosing, they became something more than they had ever been before. The images behind her changed again. This time they showed not suffering but work. Underground laboratories, factories hidden beneath mountains, schools where children learned in the dark, scientists bent over equations, engineers building machines with salvaged parts. While we died, we also prepared. We knew we could not match your fleets. We knew we could not fight your combined military might. So we did not try. Instead, we did something else. We studied you, every piece of technology you ever gave us, every scrap of data we could gather, every bit of information we could learn from the universe you tried to lock us out of. We studied it all, and then we found your weaknesses for the first time. Something like fear flickered across Theon's face. He leaned forward, his claws gripping the arms of his chair. Your civilization is old, Vasquez said, so old that you have forgotten how to build it. You maintain what exists, you replace what breaks, but you do not truly understand the systems that keep your worlds alive. Knowledge has been lost layer by layer. Over thousands of years, you are like passengers on a great ship who have forgotten that someone had to design the engines. We remembered, we studied, and we found the cracks. She spread her hands. I will not tell you what we have done. By now, you are already beginning to learn. Reports are coming in from across your territory. Small things at first, systems behaving oddly, equipment failing in unexpected ways, communications disrupted. These are not attacks, these are demonstrations. We wanted you to understand before we continued exactly how vulnerable you are. We wanted you to see the truth of your situation with clear eyes. Every defense network in the galaxy has been compromised. Every power grid, every communication system, every piece of military hardware. We have had access to all of it for at least 15 years. We simply chose not to use it. The stood up, his voice thundering across the chamber. Lies, this is a bluff. Desperate attempt to his voice cut off as every light in the council chamber flickered. For exactly 3 seconds the great hall went dark. Then the lights returned and every display screen in the room showed a single message in human text. Not a bluff. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted, demanded explanations, called for their military advisors, then stood frozen, staring at the screens, his certainty cracking before the simple reality of those 3 words. When the noise finally subsided, Vasquez spoke again. I want to be clear about something. We have the power to end your civilization. Not quickly, not through spectacular violence, but certainly and completely. We could shut down your worlds one by one. We could starve you the way you starved us. We could watch you die and Call it justice. She shook her head. We will not because we are weak. Not because we are afraid, but because vengeance is not who we want it to be. 15 billion people died so that we could remain human. If we used their sacrifice to become monsters, their deaths would mean nothing. Instead, we offer you a choice, the same choice you never offered us. You can continue as you are. Try to find the weaknesses we have planted, try to root us out, try to destroy us. If you choose this path, we will defend ourselves and we will win. Not through war, but through the simple fact that we understand your systems better than you do, or you can change. Not because we force you, but because you finally see the truth. Your way has failed. Your order has brought nothing but stagnation and suffering. There is a better path, and we are offering to walk it with you. The message will end soon. But I have one more thing to say. Vasquez stood up from her chair. Behind her, the image changed one last time. Thousands of humans standing together. Old and young, every color, every background, every type of person that humanity had ever produced, and among them aliens, dozens of species, many of them subject peoples of the council, standing with the humans as equals. You are not alone, even now, even after everything you have done. There are those who want to help you. There are species who remember what it was like to join your council to face the same choice you gave us. They remember and they chose differently. Together we are forming something new, not a council, not an empire, but an alliance. A place where species can be the first. Reports came from the Von home world. Admiral Kesseth stood in the command center of the planetary defense grid, watching his screens fill with error messages. He was old even by Von standards, his scales gone gray with centuries of service. He had commanded fleets in 3 major conflicts. He had never felt fear like this. What is happening? He demanded. His officers scrambled at their station, running diagnostics, rebooting systems, doing everything they had been trained to do when equipment failed. We don't know, Admiral, his second replied. The power grid is fluctuating across the entire north continent, but there's no attack, no intrusion. It's like the systems are simply choosing not to work. Kesseth stared at the screens. The Von home world was the most heavily defended planet in the galaxy. 7 orbital battle stations, 200 defense satellites, ground-based weapons capable of destroying entire fleets. All of it was flickering, failing, coming back online, failing again. Then the messages appeared on every screen, in every language, a single phrase repeated over and over. We could have, we chose not to get me the council, Kesseth ordered. But when his communications officer tried to connect, the channels were dead, not jammed, not blocked, just empty. On the Von home world, the most powerful military force in galactic history, discovered that it was powerless. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out in 100 different ways. On Thesson Prime, the agricultural world that fed half the council species, farmers woke to find their crops wilting. In the fields, the plants were not dying, they were simply refusing to grow. Soil tests revealed nothing wrong. Water analysis showed no contamination. Everything was exactly as it should be. Except the crops would not grow. Scientists worked through the night, studying samples, running experiments, trying to understand what had happened. It took them 3 days to find the answer. The plants had been genetically modified, so subtly that no one had noticed. Tiny change to their DNA introduced decades ago through seeds that had passed through human hands before the blockade. The modification was elegant. The plants would grow normally, produce normal yields, function in every way like unmodified crops, but they needed a specific compound in the soil to fully develop. Without it, they would wilt just before harvest, every time forever. The compound did not exist naturally anywhere in the galaxy. Only humans knew how to synthesize it. The Prime had enough stored food to last perhaps 6 months. After that, billions would starve on the Karish home world, the great military academy that trained warriors for the Council fleet. Cadets woke to find their weapon systems displaying strange messages. Target locks would not engage, missiles would not arm, energy weapons simply refused to fire. The common dawn of the academy. A decorated veteran of countless battles stormed into the control room and demanded answers. His technicians could only shake their heads. Systems are functional, common dot. Everything works, it simply won't work when we tell it to. The commandant grabbed the sidearm from a nearby rack and aimed it at the wall. He pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. He examined the weapon. It was loaded, powered, properly maintained. It simply would not fire. We could have. We chose not to. The message appeared on his personal display, and for the first time in his long life, the commandant understood what it meant to be helpless. Meanwhile, something else was happening, something quieter but in many ways more profound. On 1,000 worlds, communication screens began to show new content, not propaganda, not threats, just information, human history lessons, translated into every language, human art, music, literature, scientific papers, philosophical treatises, poetry. The Council had always controlled information carefully. Certain ideas were considered dangerous, certain histories were suppressed, certain questions were forbidden. It was for the good of galactic peace, the Council said. Unity required conformity. Now the walls were coming down. A young, if any, child sat in her room watching her screen. With wide eyes, she had never seen anything like the images before her. Humans laughing, crying, fighting, loving, humans building great cities and exploring deep oceans. Humans asking questions that her teachers had always said should never be asked. What are you watching? Her mother asked, looking over her shoulder. I don't know, the child replied, but I want to know more. On the Kellery home world, an old professor found himself staring at a text he had never seen before. It was a human document translated into his language. It talked about something called democracy, about the idea that every person had worth, that power should come from the people rather than being imposed upon them. He had studied political theory his entire life. He had never encountered anything like this. The Council had always taught that hierarchy was natural, that some species were meant to rule and others to serve. This document suggested otherwise. The professor began to take notes on a mining station in the outer reaches of Council space. Workers gathered around a display showing human music. They had never heard anything like it. The sound stirred something in them, something that had been sleeping for generations. Under the weight of endless labor and harsh conditions, one of them, a young female of the Dreth species, found herself humming along. her supervisor, would have punished her for wasting time, but her supervisor was too busy dealing with equipment malfunctions to notice. For the first time in her life, she felt something other than exhaustion and duty. She felt joy back in the council chamber. Chaos had given way to emergency session. Fees presided over a room full of frightened representatives, all demanding answers he did not have. "We must strike now," demanded the Karish representative, "while we still have some functional military capability. Gather what ships we can and destroy Earth before they finish whatever they're planning." With what? Admiral Kesseth's hologram flickered as he spoke from his compromised command center. "I cannot guarantee that any ship will function. Once it leaves orbit, they have been inside our systems for years. They could disable our entire fleet with a thought. Then we negotiate," suggested another representative. "We offer them terms. We give them what they want." "And what do they want?" They asked. "They have made no demands. They have asked for nothing. They simply showed us our vulnerability and walked away." Counselor Varick stood up. The room went quiet. A junior representative from a minor species had no right to speak at an emergency session, but nothing about this day was normal. "They told us what they want." Varick said, "They want us to change. They want us to become something better than what we are." "Ridiculous," Fiend snapped. "This is an attack dressed up in pretty words. They want to replace our civilization with their own, do they?" Varick asked. "They could have destroyed us. You heard the message. They could have turned off our power, crashed our ships, poisoned our food. They chose not to. Why? To make us surrender without a fight, to humiliate us." Varick shook his head. "No, if they wanted us humiliated, they would have done it. They would have shown the galaxy our weakness and laughed at us. Instead, they showed us our weakness and offered to help us fix it." He looked around the room at the faces of the elder species. These were the beings who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had never been challenged. They had never been wrong. And now they sat in their ancient seats, paralyzed by a species they had tried to exterminate. "I remember when the humans came," Varick continued. "I was young, but I remember they were so hopeful. They wanted to be our friends. And we responded by demanding that they cut away everything that made them who they were. When they refused, we tried to kill them, all of them. 17 billion people starved to death because they wouldn't become something else." His voice broke, but he kept speaking. "And what did they do? They could have become monsters. They could have spent 50 years planning revenge. Instead, they spent 50 years preparing to save us from ourselves. Even as they died, they were building a future where we could be better. They are not our enemies. They never were. We were our own enemies, and we were too blind to see it." The chamber fell silent. For a long moment no one spoke. Then a new message appeared on every screen in the room. It was not a threat this time. It was an invitation. "Representatives of all species welcome. At the following coordinates, come in peace. Come as equals. Come with open minds. The new alliance awaits." Stared at the message. His claws dug into the arms of his chair, and something old and angry burned in his eyes. "I will not submit to humans," he said. "I will not watch everything our ancestors built be destroyed by these children." But around him other representatives were reading the message with different expressions. Hope, curiosity, the beginning of Something that might have been shame. Counselor Varric looked at the coordinates and made a decision. I will go, he announced. My people will send a delegation. We want to hear what they have to say. One by one, other voices joined his, not the elder species, not yet, but the younger ones, the ones who had always followed orders without question, the ones who had watched the blockade and said nothing. They were ready to listen. And some were far away. On a hill, the emergency session had lasted 3 days, 3 days of arguments, accusations and fear, 3 days of watching the galaxy's oldest civilizations try to understand how they had been brought so low by a species they had tried to erase. Counselor Varric had not slept. He sat in his small chamber watching the reports coming in from across council space. Demonstrations had stopped. Whatever systems humanity had compromised remained compromised, but no new failures occurred. It was as if the humans were waiting, giving the council time to think. He thought about what he knew of humanity, not the official records which portrayed them as dangerous primitives who had foolishly resisted council wisdom, but the real history, the memories he had gathered over to centuries of watching, listening and saying nothing. He remembered the human traders who had come to his world before the blockade. They had been kind to the if any children, teaching them games, sharing stories, laughing at jokes that crossed the barriers of species and language. They had treated his people as equals, not as junior members of a hierarchy. He remembered the human scientists who had freely shared their knowledge, not hoarding it as leverage, but giving it away because they believed knowledge should belong to everyone. He remembered the human ambassador who had said no to the council and the quiet dignity in her voice when she accepted that her refusal might mean the death of her species, and he remembered the silence that followed. 15 years of nothing, while the council celebrated its victory over a dying world. We were wrong, he thought. We were so terribly wrong. His screen flickered. A new message was coming in, but not through official council channels. This one came from Earth, directly addressed to him personally. Counselor Varric, we would like to speak with you. Will you listen? He stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed his reply. Yes. The screen changed, and Elena Vasquez appeared. She looked different from her recorded message, less formal, more tired. She was sitting in what looked like a small office, papers scattered around her, a cup of something steaming at her elbow. Counselor Varric, she said, thank you for answering Director Vasquez. He replied, I did not expect to hear from you directly. She smiled. I've been watching you during the emergency session. You spoke when no one else would. You told the truth when the truth was the last thing anyone wanted to hear. I thought you deserved a real conversation. I spoke the truth because someone had to. What your people suffered, it should not have happened. It would not have happened if anyone had the courage to stand against it, including you. The question hit him like a blow. He had no defense against it. Including me. I watched. I said nothing. I told myself there was nothing I could do. That one voice would not matter. I was a coward. Vasquez nodded. Yes, you were. So were we, in our own way. When the blockade began, some of us wanted to surrender, some of us wanted to fight. We spent years arguing about it while our people died. We made terrible choices, sacrificed people who should have been saved, saved people who begged to be sacrificed. There were no good options, there was only suffering, and the question of what kind of suffering we could live with. How did you survive it? Varric asked, not physically, how did you survive it here? He touched his chest where his heart's beat. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. We told ourselves stories every night in the bunkers and the shelters and the places where we hid. From your patrols, we told stories about who we were, about who we wanted to be, about the future we were trying to build, even if we would never see it. She picked up a worn piece of paper from her desk. This was written by a child named Thomas. He was 9 years old. He died 3 days after he wrote it. When the fever took him, his mother gave it to me. Before she died, she read aloud, "When the stars come back, I hope the people who live there will be nice. I hope they will play games with us and tell us their stories. I hope they will see that we tried to be good even when it was hard. I hope they will forgive us for the times we weren't." Varric felt tears running down his face again. He forgave us after what we did. He didn't see it as us and you. He was 9 years old, dying of a disease that should have been curable, and he was thinking about the future, about how to make things better. Not about revenge, not about justice, about kindness. She set the paper down. "That's why we didn't destroy you, counselor, not because we couldn't, not because we were afraid, because of children like Thomas, because they believed we could be better than the people who killed them, and we refused to prove them wrong." The conversation lasted for hours. Vasquez told him about the years of preparation, the secret networks established before the blockade was complete, the humans who had scattered across the galaxy disguised as refugees and traders and slaves. "We placed people everywhere," she explained. "Not as spies, not as sabotagers, as helpers. We taught, we healed, we built. We did what we could for the species the Council had conquered, the peoples who had accepted modification because they saw no other choice." "Why?" Varric asked. "You had so little, you were dying. Why spend your resources helping others?" "Because that's who we chose to be. When everything else is taken from you, the only thing you have left is your choice of who to become." We could have become bitter, hateful, focused only on survival. Some of us did, but most of us decided that if humanity was going to die, we would die doing something worth dying for. She smiled. "And then we didn't die. And all those people we helped, all those connections we made, all that trust we built, it turned out to be more powerful than any weapon." Varric thought about this. The representatives who spoke up in the council chamber, the species who agreed to send delegations to your alliance, they are the ones you helped. Some of them, others are just tired of being told what to think, how to live, who to be. The council has been in charge for so long that most species have forgotten there's any other way. We're reminding them, and the elder species, the Vaughn, the Karish, the others who ruled the blockade. Vasquez's expression changed, not hard, not angry, but sad. "That's going to be harder. They've had power for so long that they don't know how to exist without it. They'll fight us, not with weapons. They know that won't work now, but with politics, with economics, with every tool they have left. Some of them will never change." Varric said Theon will never accept this. He would rather watch the galaxy burn than admit he was wrong. Probably, but the isn't the galaxy. He's one person, even if he's a powerful one. Change doesn't come from the top down. Counselor, it comes from everywhere at once. It comes from people like you who finally find the courage to speak. It comes from children watching new ideas. For the first time, it comes from workers who suddenly realize they don't have to accept things as they are. She leaned forward. That's why I contacted you. Not because you're important in the council hierarchy or not, but because you're willing to change, and people who are willing to change are worth more than all the admirals and high arbiters in the galaxy. Varric considered her words. What do you need from me? Tell your story. Tell people what you saw, what you thought, what you felt. Tell them about the blockade, not as the council describes it, but as it really was. Tell them about Thomas and Maria and Chen and Grandmother Okonkwo. Tell them about 17 billion people who died rather than become something other than themselves. And then listen. Go to the Alliance, meet the humans and the other species who have joined us. Listen to what they have to say, and when you come back, tell that story too. Varric looked at the screen for a long moment. His people had spent centuries following the council's rules, staying quiet, staying safe. They had survived, but they had not lived, not really. I will do it, he said. I will tell your story, I will tell mine, and I will listen to whatever comes next. Vasquez smiled. Thank you, counselor. That's all we ever asked. Not submission, not obedience, just people willing to listen, to think, to choose for themselves. One more question, Varric said. The demonstrations, the compromise systems, will you restore them? Will you give back what you took? Her answer surprised him. We didn't take anything. We simply showed you what was already there. Your systems were always vulnerable. Your civilization was always fragile. You just never wanted to see it. Now you do. So the vulnerabilities remain, yes, but now you know about them. Now you can fix them if you choose. Will even help if you ask. That's the difference between control and cooperation, counselor. We're not trying to rule you. We're trying to help. You stand on your own. The connection ended, and Var sat alone in his chamber. Outside, the galaxy was changing. Species that had been silent for millennia were finding their voices. Powers that had seemed eternal were discovering their limits, and somewhere on a world that should have been dead, humans were reaching out their hands to the people who had tried to kill them. He began to write, not an official report, not a diplomatic document, but a story, his story, and through it the story of humanity. It was time for the galaxy to listen. 1 year had passed since the message. The galaxy was not the same place it had been. The Galactic Council still existed, but its authority had crumbled. 32 species had formally left to join the new alliance. Dozen more had begun quiet negotiations. Trade networks that had sustained council power for millennia were fragmenting, reorganizing, finding new shapes, and Earth was healing. Alina Vasquez walked through the memorial of the fallen, her footsteps echoing against the black stone walls. The memorial stretched for kilometers, dark ribbon cutting through the green hills that had finally returned to the continent. 17 billion names were carved into those walls. 17 billion people who had died during the 50 years of darkness. She stopped at a name she knew well. Thomas Reyes, age 9, the boy who had written about hope while dying of a preventable fever. She traced the letters with her fingers and felt the weight of what they had accomplished pressing down on her shoulders. A voice spoke behind her. Director Vasquez. Thank you for meeting me here, she turned to find a Karish admiral standing. A respectful distance away, he was tall, his warrior's body still strong despite his age, but his posture held none of the arrogance that usually marked his species. This was Admiral Theon, the younger nephew of the High Arbiter and the first member of an elder species to formally defect to the Alliance. Admir, she acknowledged, you asked to speak privately. I assumed you had a reason for choosing this place. He stepped forward, his eyes moving across the endless names. I wanted to understand. I wanted to see what we did. With my own eyes, they walked together in silence for a while, moving deeper into the memorial. The names went on and on, a catalog of suffering that could never be fully grasped. I commanded ships during the blockade. These, the younger said. Finally, I destroyed human vessels trying to escape. I watched them burn and felt nothing but satisfaction. I believed I was doing the right thing, protecting the galaxy from a dangerous species. Vasquez did not respond. She let him speak. When the message came, when we saw what you had done, I was afraid. I thought you would destroy us the way we tried to destroy you. I thought it was only a matter of time before the vengeance came. He paused. I hoped for it in a way. It would have been simpler. We would have been victims, martyrs to human aggression. It would have proved everything we believed about your species, but instead you offered peace. Yes, and that made you angry. He nodded. It showed me that everything I believed was wrong, not just mistaken, but morally wrong. I had spent my life serving a cause that was unjust. I had killed innocents and called it duty. The truth of that, he trailed off, struggling for words. The truth of that is hard to live with. Vasquez finished for him. I know. We lived with it for 50 years. The knowledge that we were dying for nothing. We had done that. Our children were starving because of what we were rather than what we had chosen to be. How? The admiral asked. How did you bear it? Vasquez stopped walking. They stood before a section of the wall that was different from the rest. Instead of individual names, it bore a single inscription: to those who chose mercy so that others might live, to those who died so that humanity might remain human. We remember. We are grateful. We will not waste what you gave us. We bore it because we had no choice, she said, and because we believed that someday it would mean something, that the suffering would lead somewhere better, even if we could not see it. She turned to face him. Admiral, I'm not going to pretend that forgiveness is easy. I'm not going to say that I don't look at you and see the people who killed my family, my friends, my world. I carry that anger with me every day. It never goes away. Then why? His voice was raw. Why offer peace? Why help us when we gave you nothing but death? Because revenge would make us into you. She said it simply, without accusation. Because if we destroyed the council the way you tried to destroy us, we would prove that you were right about humanity all along. We would become the threat you always claimed we were, and because of them. She gestured at the wall, at the endless names of the dead. They didn't die so we could become monsters. They died so we could remain human. Every clears throat choice we make honors or betrays that sacrifice. I refuse to betray it. Fee the younger stared at the wall for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. My uncle will never accept this. He would rather die than admit he was Wrong, he is gathering those loyal to him, preparing to resist the alliance by any means necessary. I know he sent me here to spy, to find weaknesses, to report back anything that might help him bring you down. I know that too. The Admiral looked at her in surprise. You knew, and you still agreed to meet me alone? Vasquez smiled. Admiral, I've been doing this for a very long time. I knew what you were the moment you requested this meeting. I also knew what you could become if given the chance. She began walking again, and he followed. They emerged from the memorial onto a hillside overlooking a valley. Below them, a city was being rebuilt. Human and alien workers moved together, constructing new homes, new schools, new hospitals. Children played in parks that had been barren wasteland just a year ago. That's the choice, Vasquez said, pointing at the scene below. We can keep fighting, keep destroying, keep proving to each other that we were right to hate, or we can build something new together. What would you have me do? Go back to your uncle, tell him whatever you need to tell him, but when the moment comes, and it will come, I want you to remember this place, remember the names on that wall, remember the children down there learning to live without fear. She met his eyes, and then make your choice. 3 months later, High Arbiter Theon launched his counter-revolution. A coalition of elder species loyalists seized control of 17 worlds, declaring the restoration of traditional council authority. They demanded the immediate dissolution of the new alliance and the surrender of all humans to protective custody. Galaxy held its breath. In the alliance capital, a meeting was held. Representatives from 63 species gathered to decide their response. Many called for immediate military action. Alliance had the capability now. The systems humanity had compromised gave them an overwhelming advantage. A swift strike could end the rebellion in days. Alan Vasquez stood before the assembly. I understand the desire for decisive action, she said. I understand the fear that if we do not act quickly, the rebellion will spread. But I ask you to consider what we are trying to build. Here, the alliance is not just another empire with different rulers. It is a new idea, the idea that species can live together as equals, that strength does not require domination, that we can disagree without destroying each other. If we answer violence with violence, we prove nothing except that we are as brutal as the Council ever was. If we crush the rebellion with our technological advantage, we become the threat that the claims we are. Instead, I propose we do something harder. We wait, we offer dialogue, we make it clear that anyone who wishes to leave the rebellion may do so without punishment. We show the galaxy that the alliance wins not through force but through example. The debate lasted for hours. Many species, especially those who had suffered most under Council rule, argued for immediate retaliation. But in the end, Vasquez's approach won narrow approval. The rebellion lasted 8 months. During that time, not a single alliance ship fired a weapon. Instead, they broadcast, they shared stories, they invited dialogue, they showed again and again that there was another way. One by one, worlds began to defect from the rebellion, not because they were forced, but because they chose to. The ordinary people of those worlds watched the alliance and saw something they had never seen before, a power that did not need to dominate to be strong. Admiral Theon the Younger was the one who finally ended it. when his uncle ordered the destruction of a civilian transport carrying refugees to Alliance space, he refused. More than that, he broadcast his refusal across every channel in the galaxy. I joined this rebellion because I believed the Alliance was a threat to everything I valued. He said I was wrong. The Alliance is not a threat. It is a promise that we can be better than we have been. I choose to believe that promise. He turned his ship toward the Alliance border. 3-4 of the rebel fleet followed him. High Arbiter Theon was found dead in his chambers the next morning. The official report listed natural cousins. No one investigated too closely. 5 years later, Councillor Varric, now Ambassador Varric of the Ith Annie, stood before the United Assembly of what had once been Council Space. Representatives of over 100 species filled the Great Hall. Species that had been enemies, subjects, strangers now working together as equals. He held a document in his hands. It was the final draft of the new Galactic Charter, the framework that would govern the Alliance going forward. This document represents something unprecedented. He said it was written by beings who a generation ago would have been incapable of sitting in the same room together. It establishes no supreme authority, grants no species special privileges, demands no conformity of thought or culture.